are elections almost all the time in this country. When you think about the multiple levels of government, so there are lots of elections. And our next guest argues that one of the very best ways to advocate for financial equality and for improving the status of women in this country is, in her words, voting better. So we're going to talk about that. What actually is on the table? What's at the ballot box that you may not have considered when it comes to financial equality? Janine Rogan is a CPA. She is also author of a book called The Pink Tax: Dismantling a Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke. I love that title. Janine joins us from Calgary, Alberta. Hello there.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. We've spoken before about the book. We couldn't get into all aspects of it, so I basically begged you to return for us to talk about one other piece of it, and that is how you can exercise your democratic right and vote in a way that supports policies that will move things forward from a equality perspective. Give us the overview here on how you frame this thought or this idea of voting for impact.
Yeah, I think when I was writing the book and when I really started to delve into these topics, it felt at first kind of like two separate topics, right? There's the personal finance piece and then there's the inequality piece. And I really felt that they had to come together because so much of the decisions we make and so much of the opportunities we have in Canada, probably in the US as well, is really based on policy. So I think it's so important to make sure that when we are looking at who we're voting for at any level of government, we're looking at, how they've voted in the past, what bills they support, and if they're willing to kind of fight for that equality and ensure that we continue to take steps forward towards financial equality for all.
What are some examples of policy issues that you believe deserve the support of politicians who really do have that commitment for equality?
I mean, the first one that is kind of top of mind is daycare. So, we did see kind of throughout the COVID pandemic that childcare is obviously very, very important. And there was a lot of places, and there still are a lot of places in Canada where it is very expensive to send your child to daycare, to the point where some women or lower income earning spouses were actually staying home and not being part of the economy, and not working because it was, thousands upon thousands of dollars for them to send even one kid, but sometimes multiple children. So that's a really great example of how we can impact policy to support women. Another great one is pay transparency. We've started to see that in some provinces. Not all of them are there yet. And there are challenges with that policy as well when you see huge pay bands of, a job being $50,000 to $200,000. Well, that's not going to really help anyone achieve equal pay. So we have to be really mindful about these policies too when we're implementing them, so that kind of we can't skirt around what we're actually trying to do.
For all of us, when we go into that little cardboard semi box, we are voting for a specific candidate federally in a specific riding, but they are a part of a bigger apparatus. How do you toggle between the policy platform of the party and the candidate themselves when it comes to voting?
Yeah, that's a challenging one because I know it can be so politically charged. I really do think, though, that there is a way to look at kind of the candidate as well as their party as a whole and understand, what kind of policies they support, what kind of groups of people are part of their employment and part of their cabinet. If they're all men and they're saying that they care about women's rights and they don't have, a gender balance, and that can also be true for, other areas of people that are discriminated against. I think that that's something to really think about. Another great one is how they talk about women, and other minorities. I think I talk about it in my book, but Dr. Jill Biden, like the wife of the president of the US, was actually called kiddo in a piece, and she has her PhD. So when you see politicians doing stuff like that, you can probably rest assured that they are, even if they say they care about these things, they might not actually do that, because I firmly believe that obviously actions speak louder than words.
Yeah. How do you layer in pragmatism? And you may not, but I used to live in Alberta. You currently live in Alberta. There is a different political context and a right leaning predisposition that lives at the provincial level, certainly, it lives at the federal level as well. If you're going to put all of your focus into a candidate who has the values that you do, the likelihood of them winning in certain ridings of this country is pretty low.
Yeah, and it can be disheartening at times. I obviously live in a very conservative province, and my politics tend to lean quite left. That being said, I think there are still ways to kind of get involved at the community or the city level where we can start to impact change. So Calgary right now is going through some rezoning, and that's going to allow more multi-level, multi-purpose housing for individuals that maybe can't afford a single detached home. And I think that those are really kind of great policies to support. Um, Honestly, at the city level too, you can absolutely see things like daycares being supported. Cities do have the opportunity to choose that and make those changes to impact people. But I think sometimes we also have to continue to advocate and fight for these things. Obviously, in Alberta, the UCP were not super supportive of the $10 a day childcare, but eventually they did kind of have to get on board. So when they do get on board, I do think that those things should still be celebrated, even if it's not the party that you like to vote for or agree with.
How do you assess candidates at a municipal level? Because for the most part in this country, there aren't party affiliations and there isn't a big policy platform document that you can dig your teeth in and analyze.
Yeah, that's true. And I think a lot of times mayors of cities tend to try and not say which way they lean politically because they want to be able to work with multiple levels of government. But I think again, it can go back to, how they treat people that work with them, what kind of policies and things that they talk about that they support. And I think you can kind of gain a lot of understanding from people when you actually see kind of the things that they do in the community to support those Calgarians or Torontonians or what have you.
How does your thinking factor in political contribution? So I know the focus of your book was like, how do I vote? But there are people who have the means to support particular candidates. How do you think about that?
I mean, I don't think it should exist. I think it should be illegal. I think the government should say, here's $100,000, here's $200,000 to run your campaign. That's all you get. And then it's a very level playing field, because I think, especially with social media these days, it can be really easy to kind of go down a rabbit hole of skewing one way or the other. So I would like to see less political contributions, because I don't think we should be able to buy who we want in as government, because oftentimes those policies or those people that kind of get bought in tend to really focus on a very small portion of people and not choose things that actually uplift everyone in the community.
One of the big things, I mean, this is an interview people will listen to maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe in a year or two. So I don't want to make it too of the moment in terms of what we're dealing with politically. But Canada is a country that lives well beyond its means from an income versus expenses perspective. We have an enormous federal debt. We have an enormous federal deficit. I read some of your debrief of the recent budget. You're less concerned probably than I am about that spending. Tell me why.
So I'm actually completing my master's right now in a program that is new to, I guess, the world, but it focuses on modern monetary theory. And modern monetary theory is an economic school of thought where, in a sense, deficits don't matter. And I say that carefully, not to really dive into like we can just spend forever, because obviously there would be inflationary pressures, but because Canada is a country that's a monetary sovereign, meaning, we create our own currency, we can actually never run out of money. And as long as we're kind of working within the realms of inflation, we should be able to fund social programs that we have decided we care about. I'm a firm believer that homelessness in Canada is a choice, and it's a choice by the political party that's in power. We do have the resources and we do have the capabilities to ensure that everyone has a home. So I'm not really focused on the deficit, because it's not like government is not the same as a household. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that. Is they think, oh, well, if I was, $40 billion in debt, that would be a huge problem because Visa or MasterCard is going to come looking for me. But that's not the case when you are a country that creates their own currency. So hopefully that does a little bit of justice to the explanation as to why I think that way.
Yes. And I think our views are different, but it's not that I misunderstand. It's just that I don't agree with you on that particular
Okay,
one,
fair.
which is so great that we're having this conversation. I think a government is very similar to a household. Our debt is rated globally. We currently have a great credit score, go Canada, but that will decline if we continue to have financial affairs that are as abysmal as I think we find ourselves in. That doesn't take anything away, though, from the importance of the focus of this conversation, which is about voting. We are not facing an election federally in the short term, though it depends on when you're hearing this. What is your one call to action for people who have a value? And this is one that you and I very clearly share, which is about financial inequality. What's the one call to action that you would provide them with?
I mean, when it comes to voting, I think, doing your research and getting involved, it's obviously okay for people to have different points of view. And I think we've kind of gotten to the point where it does feel like you can't have a different point of view from someone you're talking to. But I think if you're doing it in a way that's, well researched and you're understanding, and that's truly what you care about, then vote for those people, because that's who we want to elect as our representatives for this country. And if we don't vote, then a very small group of people will have the ability to kind of dictate that. So I know voting turnout has continued to decline over the years, and that makes me sad. But I hope, and this is my one call to action, is that people do get out there and vote, again, whether it's municipally, whether it is federally or even provincially. I think it's just something that is so, so important, because there are people around the world that don't have the opportunity to do that.
That we can agree on without question. And I always make sure I take my kid too, though they grumble about it much more than they did when they were 5 and we go for ice cream afterwards. Now they're a teenager. Janine, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Janine Rogan was here to talk about voting and its importance in really setting the future of how we think about financial inequality in this country.